Hi there, Alex here at mixinglessons.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a new session in Pro Tools. So when you first set up a session in Pro Tools, you're given quite a number of options, a number of different parameters to choose from. And if it's your first time doing this, or if you're not quite sure what some of these parameters mean, then this could be a little bit of a confusing process. So I'm going to walk you through this and tell you which parameters I think you should go for when you start a new session. Before we get started, if you mix music or you record music, then I've got 3 free guides that I think you'll find really useful. I've got an EQ cheat sheet, a compression cheat sheet, and a vocal recording guide. And you can get all 3 of those by heading over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads. Okay, so when you open Pro Tools, you'll usually be presented with this window. If you're not, you can hit File and Create New, and that will give you this window, and that will allow you to create a new session. So if we look down the left here, we have some different options. First is Create, and that is where you create a new session, which is what I'm going to show you how to do. You also have Recent, and if you have any recent sessions that you've been working on, you could open those from there. We have Projects, so if you've got any sessions stored in the cloud, then you could open those from there. And in the Getting Started tab, you can create a session from a template, which we'll talk about in a moment, and then there are also some videos on Pro Tools in there. Okay, so if we're going to create a new session, the first thing to do is give it a name. The next thing you can do is choose where you're going to save this session. So local storage means that you will save the session onto your computer. If you have a subscription with Pro Tools, then you will also be able to save the session on the cloud if you want to. I'm not signed in, so I don't have that option here, but if you're signed in, you have a subscription, you could store your session on the cloud there. You have the option to create a session from a template, so you have some different options here. So you could set up a session for podcasting or one that is already set up for a singer-songwriter. In the post-production tab, there are some which are appropriate for film production, but I want to show you how to start a session from scratch, so we're not going to use a template. So if we come down here, these are some of the parameters that we need to choose from if we're going to set up our own session. So we need to choose a file type. We have 2 options, WAV or AIFF. Now, to be honest with you, either of these are full quality, lossless formats, so either are ideal. I tend to use WAV just simply because it's a little bit more of a universal format in my experience. It tends to be what most people use. It's also what I will generally create my final mix. When I bounce my final mix, my final file will generally be a WAV because that's the file format that a lot of digital distributors will ask for. It's also suitable for burning to CD, so it's just a very commonly used format and a very universal format. Next, we have the sample rate. Very, very briefly, what the sample rate does is it determines the highest frequency that you will be able to capture and reproduce in this session. Now, your sample rate is one of those topics, if you like, where if you wanted to, you could spend hours and hours online reading debates on which is the best sample rate to use. Now, we're not going to go into those debates here because I want this to be a straightforward, quick start guide for you really, so that you can watch this video and then go and set up a session in Pro Tools. So I have done a video on sample rate before, but to keep things simple and straightforward in this video, I suggest that you select 48 kilohertz. At 48K, you can capture everything that's within the human range of hearing, plus a little bit more. And having that little bit extra means that your audio interface has a little bit more room to apply a filter that it needs to apply. It's not something you need to worry about, it all goes on in the background, but 48K just means you've got a little bit more room for that filter than you would have at 44.1. And I don't see any benefit to going any higher than 48K. Like I say, you can watch that other video if you want to know a little bit more about sample rate. But assuming that you're setting up a new session to start recording, I suggest you select 48K. Okay, next up we need to select the bit depth. Again, bit depth is one of those topics where there's plenty of debate online about which is the best bit depth to use. I've done a video on bit depth before. I'll leave a link on screen if you want to understand a little bit more about it. Very briefly, what bit depth does is it determines the amount of dynamic range that you can have in your session. So the difference between the loudest and quietest points. 16-bit is fine, but my recommendation would be that you go for 24-bit. That just gives you a bit more headroom. You can record at a more conservative level and you're going to be loud enough, but you don't have to be so loud that you're running the risk of getting right up to 0 and clipping. I don't think it's necessary to go up to 32-bit float. Again, you can watch that other video if you want to know why that is. But again, for a practical quick start guide, I recommend you go for 24-bit. Now, in terms of your I/O settings, that controls essentially your inputs and outputs and how Pro Tools is going to communicate with your audio interface. Generally, I select last used because my I/O settings don't change. And so once we've set this session up, I will show you how to select your audio interface in Pro Tools. And then once that's set up and your inputs and outputs are set up correctly, then each time you can just select last used. Interleaved controls how your stereo audio files are recorded. So if you select interleaved, then when you record something in stereo, it will record the left and right channels in a single audio file. If you don't have interleave selected, it will create two separate files, one for the left channel and one for the right channel. So generally, I keep interleaved checked. If you check prompt for location, when you click create, it will ask you where you want to save the file to. Otherwise, you can select a location for where you want to save the file to, and then you have the show on startup option. So with that checked, Pro Tools will give you this dashboard each time you start Pro Tools up, and that'll allow you to either create a new session or open a recent session, whatever it is you want to do. If you don't have that checked, you won't see this dialog when you open Pro Tools, and then you would have to go to File, Create New to start a new session, or File, Open to open a session. So we click Create, Pro Tools creates our session, and then if we just move this over, we can see that our session here is saved on the desktop, exactly where we told it to save to. Okay, now I mentioned that I would show you how to select your audio interface. So if you go to Setup and Playback Engine, and then this Playback Engine here is where you select which audio interface you're working with. You shouldn't have to do this each time. As I say, when you select last used, it should select this automatically, and all of your inputs and outputs should automatically be in place when Pro Tools creates the new session. If for any reason there's an issue with the inputs and outputs once you've selected this device, then you can go to Setup and I/O, and in that menu it will show you how all of your inputs and outputs are mapped, and you can just click default, and that should generally reset things to how they should be. So I hope you found that useful. As I mentioned, don't forget to head over to mixinglessons.com/free-downloads for that free EQ cheat sheet, that free compression cheat sheet, and that free vocal recording guide. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time.